Something inside Russia is snapping, not on the battlefield, not in the streets, but deep within the lifeblood of the nation, its economy. For the first time since the war began, the Kremlin's own numbers tell a story of decline that can no longer be hidden. Moscow's new national budget has exposed the truth that the propaganda never could. Russia is breaking from the inside out. Growth has collapsed, taxes are rising, inflation is strangling the people, and Putin's obsession with war has turned the country into an economic time bomb that's ticking faster every day. The Russian government has just unveiled its national budget for 2026, and it's nothing short of alarming. After more than 3 years of relentless war spending, emergency stimulus, and attempts to shield the economy from sanctions, the cracks are now impossible to ignore. What was once paraded as resilient is now showing the unmistakable signs of exhaustion. The budget is more than a plan, it's a confession. It reveals where every ruble is going, and it makes one thing absolutely clear. Russia is no longer investing in its future. It's simply paying to survive the present. At the heart of this budget lies a devastating reality. 38% of every single ruble the Kremlin spends is now going to defense and security. That's not just military equipment. It includes intelligence, border control, and the ever-growing machinery of repression. In comparison, social spending, the money meant to care for Russian citizens, stands at just 23%. Putin's government is now investing more than 50% higher in war than it does in its people. To put it bluntly, the Russian state has become a war machine. Its economy, once driven by oil exports and industrial growth, is now being redirected toward destruction. The focus on defense spending might sound patriotic to some, but in economic terms, it's a dead end. Weapons don't generate wealth. Missiles don't feed people. Tanks don't create innovation. This is money that will never come back, and over time, it will drain Russia dry. But the most terrifying part isn't just how much is being spent, it's how little is left for everything else. Education and healthcare combined make up only about 10% of total spending. Infrastructure and the economy, just 14%. That means Russia is literally disinvesting in its own future. Schools, hospitals, roads, technology, all taking a backseat to the war effort. The Kremlin's priority is no longer building a better Russia. It's just keeping control of what's left. For years, the government promised that war spending would boost industries, create jobs, and modernize production, but that illusion has shattered. The data shows that this so-called war economy is not creating prosperity, it's cannibalizing it. Growth is collapsing from 4.3% in 2024 to just 1.3% projected in 2026. And even that number, analysts warn, may be wildly optimistic. So how is Moscow keeping the lights on? Through debt and higher taxes. The 2026 budget projects a deficit of 3.8 trillion rubles, roughly 1.6% of GDP, and to shrink that gap, Putin's government is doing something that hits every single Russian citizen, raising the value-added tax from 20% to 22%. It's the first major VAT increase in years, and it's going to sting. Every product, every service, every essential item just got more expensive. Russians already struggling with rising prices will now be forced to pay even more. It's a desperate move to squeeze every last ruble out of the population. But the irony is that this tax increase will actually feed inflation, the very monster Moscow is trying to tame. Inflation, currently hovering around 8%, is expected, or rather hoped, to fall to 4% next year. But that's wishful thinking. The ruble is weakening again, sanctions are cutting off imports, and the cost of production is climbing. Raising taxes in this environment is like pouring gasoline on a fire and hoping it cools the flames. So why is Putin willing to risk it all? Because the war in Ukraine is swallowing everything. Defense and security spending, now 7% of Russia's GDP, is the single biggest driver of government expenditure. The Kremlin has decided that survival through war is more important than survival through growth. But this obsession comes with a deadly price. Every ruble spent on missiles and tanks is a ruble stolen from schools, hospitals, and the future of Russian families. The regime is trying to mask the pain with propaganda, telling citizens that they're part of a historic struggle, but behind the scenes, officials are scrambling. Budgets for education and healthcare are being slashed to feed the war machine. Infrastructure projects are being frozen. Businesses not tied to defense are being starved of funding. Russia is not investing in prosperity, it's investing in power. And power, without a foundation of economic stability, eventually collapses. Even worse, Russia's main lifeline, oil and gas, is now in deep trouble. Revenues have fallen by around 25% year on year. Drone strikes from Ukraine have hammered refining capacity, knocking out nearly 40% of production in some regions. Every explosion at a refinery doesn't just hurt Russia militarily, it bleeds its economy. The Kremlin depends on oil and gas exports to fund its budget. But the buyers are vanishing. The United States has already imposed a 50% tariff on Indian imports and is pressuring the European Union to cut off all indirect purchases of Russian crude. Brussels is tightening the noose too, warning that anyone who buys Russian oil will face penalties. If China and India bow to Western pressure, Moscow's energy sector could implode overnight, and the consequences of that would be catastrophic. Without those sales, Russia would lose the money it uses to fund everything, from soldiers' salaries to pension payments. Oil production can't just be paused. Wells collapse, pipelines corrode, and restarting costs billions. If the market disappears, parts of Russia's energy empire could be lost forever. Inside the country, another problem is quietly suffocating the economy: sky-high interest rates. The central bank, trying to fight inflation, has kept rates at a staggering 17%. That's down slightly from 18%, but still among the highest in the world. At these levels, ordinary Russians can't afford to borrow, and businesses can't afford to expand. Factories that once dreamed of expanding production are now shelving their plans. Entrepreneurs who could have created jobs are walking away. The state's wartime spending has crowded out the private sector, leaving only those industries connected to the military thriving. In effect, Russia is no longer a market economy. It's a command economy disguised by propaganda. And while the defense sector grows fat on government contracts, the rest of the nation is starving. Small businesses are dying, consumer spending is falling, and people are saving what little they have, afraid of what comes next. Ordinary citizens are now trapped in a vicious cycle. Prices rise, taxes rise, but wages outside the war industry stagnate. The shift to a wartime economy has caused wage inflation for those working in state-supported sectors, forcing private companies to offer higher pay to keep their employees. That, in turn, drives up costs even further. The result is a spiral, one that the Kremlin can no longer control. Putin's government may boast about record-low unemployment, but it's an illusion created by war mobilization. Factories producing ammunition and drones are hiring, but at the expense of every other sector. The private economy is withering, replaced by a system where survival depends on how close a business is to the state. And when the state is focused on war, everything else, from consumer goods to technology, begins to crumble. What Russia is heading toward is not just a slowdown. It's a new era of stagnation. Economists call it stagflation, low growth combined with high inflation. It's one of the most dangerous economic traps imaginable because it paralyzes an entire nation. Businesses can't expand. Consumers can't spend. Prices rise, but incomes don't. Putin's own budget predicts just 1.3% growth for 2026, and even that may be optimistic. The real picture could be much worse once sanctions tighten and oil revenues shrink. Russia's so-called National Wealth Fund, the rainy day reserve that has been used to plug the deficit, is drying up. Once that money runs out, Moscow will have to either borrow at punishing interest rates or print money, both of which would send inflation soaring again. The government may try to paint this as manageable, but the numbers speak for themselves. Russia's income is falling, its spending is rising, its debts are growing, and the foundations of its economy, oil, gas, industry, are cracking under the strain. So why keep going? Why does Putin continue to pour billions into a war that's draining his nation's future? The answer is simple. He has no choice. The war is no longer about victory, it's about survival, not for Russia, but for the regime itself. If the Kremlin cuts military spending, it risks exposing the weaknesses of its military and economy. If it keeps spending, it bleeds the economy dry. It's a lose-lose scenario. Putin has built a system where the only path forward is through escalation. The war has become the lifeline that sustains his rule, and it's also the poison that's killing it. Every year, the budget grows more militarized. Every year, the civilian economy shrinks. Russia is trapped in a cycle of self-destruction, one that no amount of propaganda can fix. The new 2026 budget isn't just another policy document, it's a mirror reflecting the crumbling state of a nation. The numbers reveal a story of desperation, growth collapsing, inflation climbing, taxes rising, oil revenues falling, and a government clinging to war as its only strategy for survival. Behind every statistic is a warning. The system is breaking, not just economically, but structurally. When a nation spends more on weapons than on its people, when it taxes the poor to fund bombs, and when it bets its entire future on an unwinnable war, collapse becomes inevitable. Russia may still look strong on the outside, but inside, the cracks are widening. The empire is corroding, not from foreign pressure, but from within. Putin's Russia has built its foundation on conflict and control, but now that foundation is beginning to give way. And as the world watches, one truth is becoming impossible to deny. The Russian economy is breaking, and this time there may be no way back.